the Eco Platform, where he has been instrumental in advancing environmental product declaration methodologies and compliance frameworks across Europe. So today his insights will be invaluable as we explore the revised CPR and its implication for the construction industry. Christian, we are delighted to have you with us today. Would you like to say a few words?
I can. I'm happy to be here again. See some familiar names who are participants of this meeting, and yeah, I hope that I can give some new insights for those who need orientation about the upcoming regulation. And as we had that before, Khadija, we are very flexible. So this is very complex, and there are so many different questions around it. So I hope we have sufficient time to really get the questions then which are there. So don't be shy and ask your questions so that we can answer them.
Exactly. Thank you, Christian. So yeah, now that we have set the stage, let us review today's agenda. So here is what we will be covering. We will start by understanding the fundamentals of the construction products regulation, its key requirements, and the recent updates. We will next be diving into the phased compliance schedule, highlighting key milestones and deadlines for manufacturers. We will also explore which construction materials are being prioritized under the CPR and why. Then we will focus on the environmental reporting requirements, including the mandatory declarations and the integration of environmental impacts into the revised CPR framework. And finally, we will cover the mandatory site inspections and potential penalties for non-compliance. And as Christian said very well, it's actually a quite complex topic. We will try to cover as much as possible. Throughout the session, we will be hearing insights from Christian. And of course, we will make sure to save as much time as possible for Q&A. So please feel free to share your questions with us in the chat. Yeah, so now let's begin with an overview of the CPR. So to begin, the construction products regulation is a legislative framework that basically serves as the foundation for marketing construction products within the European Union. It requires manufacturers to create a declaration of performance, or DOP, which details basically technical characteristics, like, for example, the durability of a product, and that has to be done before affixing the CE marking. Non-compliance with CPR regulations is not only illegal, but can also lead to significant penalties, as we will be talking about in a bit. And this CPR is evolving. So in 2022, some revisions were proposed to include environmental impacts in this DOP. And this in order, of course, to align with broader sustainability goals of the European Union. And this revised framework was actually adopted earlier this month by the European Council, and it officially came into effect a few days ago, so very recently. And let's explore then what it means in practice. So this revised CPR is introducing a phased compliance. So it has been signed, as we said earlier, in November. It will come into force by the end of 2024. And the phased compliance will start with then full compliance anticipated for 2028. So this phased rollout will allow different product categories to basically adapt over time, and then so minimize immediate disruption. And this gradual approach is prioritizing actually a few high impact products in an initial phase, like precast, concrete, structural, metallic products, thermal insulation products, or cement. So basically, manufacturers producing these materials should expect to align with this harmonized standard more quickly, let's say. And then, so basically for these high impact products, certain requirements will be mandatory as early as next year, 2025. So by this date, the manufacturers will need to comply with the updated standards for performance and for some environmental metrics. And then by 2028, all construction products falling under the CPR should fully comply with the environmental and technical standards that are established here. So this timeline gives time for more complex data reporting, digital adaptation, which we will see will be very important, to allow each product group to meet the standardized requirements in a progressive way. Looking deeper into these high impact products, so the focus on these specific materials aligns with the EU's broader decarbonization goals, of course. Concrete, for example, is a foundational material in construction, but it's also associated with a very high carbon emissions due to its production process, especially because of cement. So concrete is prioritized to address this significant contribution to embodied carbon in the built environment. Then we also have metals like steel, aluminum, which are widely used in construction, have substantial environmental footprints because of their energy-intensive production processes. So their prioritization also allows for early standardization of reporting and reduction efforts. And then also thermal insulation materials, which are critical for improving energy efficiency in buildings. So their inclusion also aligns with the EU's climate goals to reduce operational carbon and at the same time make sure that their production is also environmentally responsible. So basically, why this prioritization basically for embodied carbon tracking. So by focusing on these specific high impact categories, first, the EU can make measurable progress towards reducing carbon emissions across the sector. Also for a standardized reporting. So by establishing these first robust frameworks for these materials, this will enable a more structured approach to environmental reporting and compliance. And of course, then, as I said, the decarbonization objectives, so addressing the environmental impacts of these priority products will support the EU's commitment to achieving net zero emissions. So this prioritization reflects the strategic effort to tackle the most impactful areas of construction as early as possible in this transition towards full compliance with the revised CPR. I think Christian might want to expand later on the reasons also about this prioritization and maybe on implications for manufacturers. Let's save that for later. And so basically, for all of this to happen, to integrate these environmental impacts into the revised CPR, so of course, environmental reporting is central. And yeah, these are basically the key steps of environmental reporting. So first of all, gathering the environmental data, and that's quite challenging part of the process, as we hear a lot from our customers. So manufacturers must implement robust systems to collect their environmental data in a consistent way across all their production sites. So this basically includes data on raw materials, on energy consumptions, on emissions, etc. And this data is basically so it will form the foundation of an accurate life cycle assessment for this environmental reporting. So this LCA will basically evaluate the environmental impacts of the product throughout its life cycle, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal. And this is guided by the international standards like ISO 14025 or EN 15804. And then the final step is, of course, publishing these environmental impacts, either in EPDs, environmental product declarations, or DOPs. And for this information, so initially the data will be shared in a PDF format, but then as the digital product passport, the DPP system is being developed, this reporting will be shifting towards this standardized digital format. So currently, what is the status quo? As I was saying, so currently, construction material manufacturers can voluntarily report their environmental data, and the format that is often used are the verified and published EPDs, environmental product declarations, and those are voluntary declarations on a product's environmental impact that is verified by a third-party verifier and published by a program operator. And it includes a series of indicators. Some are mandatory, others are voluntary. And the shift now from this voluntary to mandatory as part of the revised CPR, it will become mandatory for construction material manufacturers to report their environmental data for products that fall under this harmonized standard. So they must do so in this DOP, or Declaration of Performance, which is then a mandatory declaration that is defined in the CPR and that gives an overview of the technical characteristics of the product, as I said, but then also according to the new CPR, it will also need to include environmental indicators in the future. So this DOP must adhere to the format and standard that are specified in the CPR to ensure consistency and also, of course, comparability across products. So what is the relationship between these two formats, between the EPD and the DOP? So both declarations are based on ISO 14025 and EN 15804. So same standards for life cycle assessments. For the products that don't fall yet under the harmonized standards, manufacturers can continue to voluntarily publish their environmental information in the form of EPDs. And then for products that fall under the standards, the DOP must include both the technical and the environmental characteristics in the future. So yeah, and that's also the information that is today published in the EPDs. And then a notified body will verify and publish the DOP. Then this compliance, of course, is not only about, it's not just about paperwork. Some regular site inspections also will verify the alignment between the reported data and the actual performance. So each manufacturing site will need to meet environmental data and performance standards as documented in the DOPC. And while these checks are actually essential for upholding the standards, of course, they can be particularly challenging, for example, for small and medium enterprises, where these inspections could pose some logistical or financial challenges. So small manufacturers may struggle to maintain continuous compliance monitoring across all their production sites, especially because of limited resources. And then to mitigate this, there are options that are being discussed, like digital audits or randomized sampling. But these alternatives, yeah, as I said, are still under discussions, and I think Christian might want to share some perspective on those and how these inspections can actually be made more practical, especially for smaller companies. Christian, I'm not sure if at this point you would like to add something.
Hello again. I don't know. Would you want me to step in right now, or do you have more slides that you want to show right now? Because then I don't want to interrupt you, and then maybe start with some highlights again. I don't know. I see nearly 60 people here in the virtual room. If you're not so much smarter than me, I needed probably 10 times the explanation on how regulation is really working and how the CPR is coming into force, and when it becomes mandatory. It's so complex, and it's not only the CPR, there's other regulation related to it. So I think I would like to repeat and try to make that a little bit more comprehensive, because it's so complex and it's so important to understand it.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I just have a couple of more slides. I was trying to cover it all as as comprehensively as possible. It's a really tough topic. So yeah, I will then go through the
Go
two
ahead.
next slides and then give you the floor. Thank you. Yeah, so basically, as also I said in the beginning, if a harmonized standard exists, then the manufacturer is required to create a DOP before fixing the CE marking onto the product. And without this process, a placement of the product on any market of an EU member state is illegal. So non-compliance can carry substantial penalties. And legally, with the CPR, it means either a withdrawal or a recall of the products, or even so member states are also setting their own legislations on penalties for non-compliance. And for example, Germany can impose fines up to 100,000 euros per product, and may even enforce other penalties for repeated violations. So yeah, just wanted to mention this very quickly. And then, so yeah, we have put together these practical tips for compliance. I think then we can dive much deeper into this, because I guess you all want to know about this part. So basically, very practical tips. First, use industry standards data sets to ensure consistency. Consult notified bodies early to clarify requirements for you, and then appoint a dedicated EPD officer. And that's also something that Christian is going to tell us more about. We have this compliance checklist that I can actually share with you at the end afterwards. So no need to go into more details into it. Yeah, so Christian, if you want to expand on any of these practices, any of these parts, highlight also how Eco Platform is supporting companies in achieving compliance, and yeah, and your experience in this process.
Thank you, Khadija. This is, as I said, it's so complex, and we will not be able to cover it all in so short time. So we need to focus on some highlights, and I think it is good to already see some of your questions in the chat, which we will then later on try to answer. Let me maybe go a step back and take you by the hand and say what this is all about, what we are talking about here. So what is regulation, basically? And I think starting with that, there are different pieces of EU regulation. One is a regulation, but there are directives as well. And most people I talk to do not really understand the difference of the two. So with the construction product regulation, and as well for the eco-design for sustainable products regulation, we have a regulation that comes into force on a European level and acts directly from there. Whereas we have, for example, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and the directive covers requirements that will be put into force via national law through the member states, right? So the Environmental Performance of Buildings Directives gives requirements that goes to the sovereign member states, into their national building codes, and they have to implement it into their national building codes. So there are differences. What is so special now about the CPR, and I want to take that as a standalone, there are so many requirements. It's so complicated. It's just another piece of regulation which makes our life, talking about manufacturers, for example, now more difficult, more expensive. No, I think it's not. I have not expected the EU to come up with a bundle of regulation which is so much working and acting together, well aligned, as what we have seen now, or what we are seeing now under the Green Deal. The CPR is fulfilling the requirements under the ESPR, so the Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulations, for the construction products, so that you deliver what is needed by the ESPR by fulfilling the CPR. Step one. So that is well aligned. Secondly, the CPR is replacing, or the requirements from the CPR is forcing, yes, forcing product manufacturers, for products that have a harmonized European standard, forcing them to deliver data. You say DOP, by the way, it will change in future under the new CPR, it will be called DOPC. So that is a slight change. So we will recognize DOP will be a DOPC, the Declaration of Performance and Conformity. And that means that member states, for example, and other pieces of regulation, maybe on corporate level, on building level, will not be able to specify requirements forcing manufacturers to come up with new pieces of information just for their purpose. So with the CPR, you will be forced to deliver data, environmental information, declare it once, and all the member states are satisfied with it. Not even France will be allowed to come up with special requirements and ask for something on top. So this information will replace the national regulation that we see. So much different and non-consistent requirements based on different methodologies and slightly different indicator. You need to be based in a certain member state database or whatsoever. So that will come. Unfortunate, it will come over time. So we are, and it will be very complex. But it is useful, and it's really relevant for you to dive into it and to understand it. So you said, Khadija, that the CPR, the new CPR, came into force because of these 20 days. By the way, it's working days. I wasn't aware of that until a couple of days before. So it will be probably a Christmas present. So it got adopted, so it got signed, and it is official, but now the publication is the day when it comes into force, and that is still a day to come. But we are sure it will be in the next day. It will be before the year is out. So then we will come into force. But for your product category, whatever that may be, the CPR only comes into force if a harmonized standard exists for your product category. So a product category, you probably, you see here some of the product categories which are highlighted here and given as priorities. We have around, I think, 450 different product categories identified, for which we have harmonized EN standards. And to have a harmonized standard is required because it must be clear that with the given information for that product category, in the EU market, you satisfy all regulation or national building codes existing. So you can imagine that if you are now delivering data for the construction purpose, it needs to be made sure that all the different building codes are satisfied, the requirements from the building codes. And for that purpose, to make sure that this is the case, you need a harmonization of the Euro norms and for product data to be delivered. Now, we have existing harmonized EN, so hen. If I say hen, then that doesn't mean this chicken, but it means hen means this harmonized European norm. So there are hen, but based on the old CPR. And now maybe I share my screen and I show you something which we prepared for our, you mentioned it, for our education course, our Eco-EPD officer course. I saw at least Hannah, at least saw one participant here who's joining the course and diving into this. So where we are giving orientation for mainly manufacturers to understand the regulatory context and what is required, how you prepare for it, what is needed from manufacturers and from LCA consultants, what is a verification, what is, all the background information, and it gives orientation on the development of the demand. Now that we are already diving into it, I zoom into the time frame to explain a little bit more how the CPR becomes, the new CPR becomes active or applicable or mandatory for your product category. And that goes over time. And this is indicated by this little line. So we are entering, I would say, a 10-year wild, wild west scenario, because there will be coexisting data. Some of the hens, no, not chicken, harmonized Euro norms, some of the hens will be there, indicated here in orange, will be there still based on the old CPR. And some of them, indicated in light blue, will be already there based on the new CPR. And the ones based on the new CPR will have the requirement to, for example, provide environmental product information according to 15804, right? And with that, you could say, and this is not correct, don't quote me on that. You could say the EPD becomes mandatory. And it is not correct because it's not called EPD. In fact, as you put it into your slides, Khadija, you're right, the DOPC becomes mandatory to be shared via the DPP, the Digital Product Passport. So that becomes mandatory, and it will come from the PO, the EPD program operator and their governance and their program modes that have to follow from in their governance and their verification. It will shift to the governance of the regulation with referring to the very same standards, the 15804 that we are using for the EPD, the voluntary EPD. And the validation, it's not called verification then anymore, the validation will follow the new, oh no, I'd spare that out, it's too complex, the new AVCP3 Plus or the AVS 3 Plus system. So there are new rules for the validation of that data under the law by notified bodies, and I see that there are already questions to it. But coming back to that, answering that question, who will be the future notified bodies later? There will be notified bodies, more or less taking the role of the POs right now, or parts of it. The verification or validation part of it will be taken over by the notified bodies, whereas the governance will be taken by the law and then the standardization, which we have a standardization request for. Complicated stuff, I know. And that means now that here, product category by product category, the CPR becomes mandatory. So it's not the case that we have one date where the new CPR becomes mandatory, but there's a crescendo of products or of products that fall under the new CPR, if you understand what I mean. You have the new hen, and in that moment, as it's published, it becomes mandatory for the product category. And that will take time, as we see. And now back to the these. This is an older slide. You showed a different presentation of it. Here it is, or it was sorted. I think that was from 23. So the commission identified the priorities, and I think they made it quite. They were diligent on putting the right priorities to the different product categories. So they started, as you see, with precast concrete, structural. You mentioned them, Khadija. And some of them even started because we couldn't wait possibly for the new CPR to become active. They even started under the old CPR in a so-called CPR acquis process to make the new requirements already applicable under old legal conditions. Okay, here it gets really complicated, and lawyers are needed to understand what that means. But the simple fact is that for these high priority categories, we will see the new requirements already applicable, so mandatory, much earlier. So this is the order that was intended. However, don't think that this order will remain the same. It will change. There are the possibilities of so-called fast tracks. So you can come up with a proposal earlier, and then that would be implemented. Of course, following the official procedures. So I hope that was enlightening and not only confusing. I know it is quite complex and pretty confusing. So looking to this slide here, we expect to achieve a full implementation or a full fade out of hens following the old CPR only in the middle of the next decade. So 10 years or so from now. Let's see how that develops. Now, having that in mind, and now knowing that that the building level will need environmental data to comply with, for example, the EPD requirement, EPBD requirements, so the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Let me scroll over there a little bit. So there's other regulation than regulation for product manufacturers directly relevant, which is relevant, for example, for the building designers, building owners. And this is the new requirement that will come via the national building codes that make a building LCA, so a life cycle assessment of a building, mandatory for all new built buildings. And that will come into force in 2030. And it will come into force for buildings larger than 1,000 square meter used area, even in 2028. If this comes into force and building designers, building owners, and their project teams will need to make sure that their building complies with the new code from a certain time on, they will need data. And they will need data from specific products, yes, from specific products like a window of a certain manufacturer. And there you will have DOPC data from a certain time on, but maybe not for all of the products already in 2030 or 2028. But they will need data. What data will they use if there's no specific data? for that product category. So they will probably ask for EPDs to be able to perform their LCA and to prove that they comply with the code. Or they will use generic data. Another possibility, generic data, which is product neutral. It doesn't specify a certain manufacturer. And this is important to understand. There are different data types, for example, generic data, which you need for early design stages when you need to perform a building LCA before you have a single product specifically tendered, because you're not allowed to. So you design your building, but you must make sure from the beginning on as an architect that your building complies with the building codes, so that you have a certain performance per square meter in kilogram CO2 equivalent per year. And if you want to make sure that you comply, you need to have a building LCA at a very early design stage. And therefore you need generic data. And then over the time of the design process, you will replace one material after the other, and the data set, the LCA data set, the EPD data set, for one product after the other by a specific data set to monitor whether you're still on track. And that means...
Sorry to interrupt, Christian. Maybe
Yeah.
we can take this opportunity to tackle one of the questions actually that's related
Yes.
to what you are talking about. So someone here is asking, is the use of model EPDs or average EPDs permitted in the new CPR?
At the moment, no. At the moment, no.
No.
That will be a case for later definitions, and for the group of notified bodies where we are part of with the eco platform, where we are trying to define ways of verification and then later validation via tools. At the moment, no.
No.
And of course, this is related to the critical part which we spared out, and that is the worst case scenario as well. Which is maybe something which we save for a little bit later, or I don't know, maybe we answer some questions before.
Yes, well, we can just say very quickly, now that you mention it, that's the case. That's something to be used when precise and specific data for environmental impact is not available, for example. So then manufacturers would be expected to use conservative estimates, and that's and those would reflect like the highest possible environmental impacts. And this is the so-called worst case scenario. But sure, then let's look at the list of questions that we have here.
Yeah, maybe I add something to the worst case scenario, because I think it's important to understand then the legal text from a lawyer's perspective. The old CPR was referring, for example, to fire, behavior to fire. If you declare a behavior to fire, then you must make sure, it must be sure that no product that carries that declaration will be worse in performance than the performance declared. And that's very same principle they now impose to, and they apply to the new CPR for the environmental performance. And that is a bit tricky, because we are still working with a lot of background average data, generic data. So what is the worst case scenario? And thinking about all the indicators that you have, will it be only carbon, or will it be, what if you have the background data set that you use, and one is worst in global warming potential and the other one in water consumption? So what will be decisive? Are you cherry picking reverse? So there's still a lot of clarification to be done. But however, it is definitely intended to make your EPDs as specific as possible if it comes to the supply chain. If it comes to production plants, so make it plant specific, and think about suppliers. And if you want to mix, then you are not to mention the average, but the worst case scenario, and that will be dramatic. And there's a lot of implication to it. If you think about the chain of custody up to the point where you sell things, you need then to sell not a product, which is a product today, but it may be 100 different products. Or if you group them, you have maybe product green and a product brown, and the rest will be an average, but that average needs to be communicated with a worst case, whatever that means, scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. That's in practice, it's going to be complicated. Yeah.
Difficult. Yeah. So time to prepare right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so another question that we have here is, do companies that this apply to have to amend valid EPDs to a DOP?
No, the EPD, in fact, will be replaced by the DOPC.
By the DOP.
And it's not even allowed to have two communication formats for the same. So if you have a HAN with a new CPCR, then this will replace the EPD, and you will take the EPD out of the communication. However, it is still a question that we have and discussions that we have. How about additional information which is not covered by the DOPC? Certain explanations, certain further information about how to apply scenario descriptions and so on. How will that be covered? Not sure yet. But
so a valid EPD,
short answer, the EPD will be replaced by the DOPC.
Even though it's valid at the time of implementation.
But let me mention that, because that's now again very important to understand. If this is the process from starting to collect the data and so on, and here's the declaration like the EPBD, then here in the very end, there's a difference between DOPC and EPD. But the majority of the process remains the same. So you will need tools to collect the data, to model, include and involve your supply chain, understand what you're doing, where are the big impacts, and all that remains the same under the 15804. The methodology is exactly the same. It's just then the question of how do you communicate it? Will it be communicated via the as a DOPC under the DPP or in a DPP, and will it be validated by a notified body, or will it be verified by a PO and then communicated in an EPD? But it's actually the same, and we'll make sure as Eco Platform that it is the same. We need to translate, and that was my excursus for the different coexisting data types. We will make sure that we translate exactly the same as we have as mandatory requirements for the voluntary area to make it consistent. The data must be consistent.
Yes. And then there's the digital product passport, right? Which is the final step then. Are there other requirements for that at that point?
I don't know what do you mean?
Like, would there be any, so what's the additional requirements for that final step? So the digital product passport is just, so it's a standardized digital format to present this data, right? So it's like the final.
Yeah. So the DPP becomes mandatory through the CPR, so the Construction Products Regulation, or for other products via the ESPR, so the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. All products, not only construction products, will need to have a DPP. So the necessary information will to be communicated via a DPP. There are at the moment 3 options for how this is going to be done. It's not clear yet. I think option 3 will be most likely, where the manufacturers will have that, or will publish the DPP via their own servers, and that there will be only a registry with a backup system coordinated by the EU Commission. However, this will be there. All products will have a DPP. All products that want to have a CE marking.
Okay.
If this is answering the question. And this will become mandatory from 2028. So 2026, it will be enforced and applicable from 2028. And there's a standardization request out to SEN, and we are participating as Eco Platform with our standardization working group in these activities. The semantics, the format, how the DPP is going to act and what will be contained, and still work to do. A lot of work to do.
Yes, I can imagine.
How realistic this is that they are ready in time, I don't know. There may be a delay, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, so the person who asked the question said that this answered the questions. Yeah, we have 11 minutes left. Do we want to then go through so what else do we have? We also have a question about the notified bodies. Who will they be for the certification? So I guess the POs, the current POs can apply to become notified bodies, right?
So in the group of notified bodies, notified bodies, for those who are maybe not sure what that means, the notified bodies fall under national law, so they are member state related. So your member state will, or you can apply to become a notified body under your or in your member state. For example, it's Accredia in Italy, or it's the DAX in Germany who's doing these you will have to be accredited in most of the countries, I think even in all. And then you need accreditation first via DAX or Accredia or so in your country, and then you can apply for becoming a notified body. If you're a notified body, then you will do the validation of the data for your member state. Whatever you do and what will be, so these notified bodies, you can choose whatever and wherever you want, and each of them, no matter from what member state they come, will have the same relevance. So once this is validated, your data gets validated, you're done, you are through. So these notified bodies will be what we have as program operators today. All the program operators, I guess, will become notified bodies, plus there will be some new. And we see now in the group of notified bodies that the former notified bodies, which are more used to laboratory testing, will get used to, and they're learning now, and they're coming on board of Eco Platform. They start to learn the differences of things you can measure, like a material strength or behavior to fire, compared to environmental performance, which is model-based and calculated. So that's a very different way of validating data. And this is on the way.
Okay, interesting. We have a few questions. I'm sorry I didn't really cluster them, but we have a few ones about timeframes that might be interesting, actually. So, for example, what time frame can you expect if you are ranked 4th in the priority list? What can you use as a guide to get a better feeling of when you will be affected? And are there any newsletters that we can subscribe to in order to stay up to date with the experts groups?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to make sure that within the Eco Platform, our members stay informed, so we are following that up. That is one way. So come on board of Eco Platform. I think, like Emida, you are,
Yes.
you are probably, you can tell everybody that you're well informed about what's going on and what's coming up, and can provide that information on. Of course, keep an eye on the standardization requests and on the publications. So what is going on? So there's a process that you need to go through. There will be a standardization request. So for fourth in the list, this will still fall under the CPR key. So it gets very complicated if I go into the details right here. I wouldn't start doing that now for each category, but that will come into force a little bit earlier. Or will be mandatory a little bit earlier. I expect the fourth in the group or the first 2 and 3, 4 to become mandatory already in 1 or 2 years. Others will follow only later under the new CPR, really.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then we have one, does that mean that in 10 years, EPDs, POs, and the whole system will become completely replaced by DOPCs?
No. So maybe
it's more complex than that.
Okay. So first of all, there's one role which we take at the moment and which will remain as program operators and our platform with the eco platform, that is giving advice, clarification of problems, implementation of the whole thing. So that is a role that will remain. But for the POs, the notified bodies will take over the validation of that part, which falls under this new CPR, which will need a CE marking. For all the other products which do not fall under the CE marking, this will remain voluntary, and even for legal purposes, for example, on the Green Claims Directive, the EPBD will be the chosen format. Then there is communication outside of the EU, and in other regions we do not have the CPR and the DOPC. And we see strong developments in China as well as in North America. And you will need EPDs there as well. And their program operators are still to give the governance, as there is no governance in a form of a law right now. So I think there will be a strong role even within the EU for the program operators, as we need to make sure that we have a consistent approach between mandatory data and voluntary data. And to make sure that there is consistency, we need a governance structure which will be provided by Eco Platform. This is exactly why we are there, to translate the mandatory requirements, and they will change over time and translate it to the voluntary area, and then give feedback of our learnings and play a role in advancement and maintenance of the regulation and the standards, of course. So yeah, there will be a future. And as the cake is becoming bigger and bigger, so far we are talking about a couple of % of products that have an EPD. In future, every single product will need an EPD. So there is a huge demand.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, more questions. We have 4 minutes. Maybe we can tackle a final one. And then for all the others, we will, of course, thank you for your questions. We will send you a document with all the answers after this. Yeah, so one question maybe, are the mandatory environmental fields on the DOPs only required once the new harmonized norm is in place, or are these required as soon as the new CPR is in play?
Okay, so yeah, it's complex. So first of all, the new CPR only comes into place product category after product category, as we learned. And then there's an overlaying requirement that is more directed to the member states, and that is on the indicators that become mandatory. If that is the question, if I understood correctly. So from the beginning on, there will be so with the implementation now and the enforcement, there will be the requirement of the 4 global warming potential indicators. They will be mandatory directly from the European level. However, you can report them all, and I would advise every manufacturer to directly report them all. Uh, the member states are free to choose from the other indicators already earlier and make one or more of them mandatory as well. So there's this full list. But all member states, to all members, all core indicators will become mandatory 4 years after implementation, and then 6 years after enforcement, um, it will be all indicators. So it's a question of time. But the CPRs, which for the product categories for which the new CPRs will come into force only in 6 years, they will directly make all indicators mandatory.
Mandatory, yeah, makes sense.
But this mandatory indicator, this is rather on member state level, I would say.
Okay. Okay, I think, time is coming to an end. We don't want to overstretch. We have a lot of questions still that we will, we are collecting, and we will be sending the answers in a document. Also, Christian, so we are really happy to hear your feedback. So you can use this QR code. And Christian also wanted to share, we can share it in the chat, or if you want to share your screen as well on what Eco Platform is doing also to help you navigate these complex topics with the course that you can subscribe to.
Oops, I had a window popping up. Let me see. I can maybe show this flyer, which leads you to our homepage. You said you wanted to share that flyer. Maybe you can share it here in the in the chat. So if you have that flyer, you will see the dates
as well.
And you can follow the link to our that's on our homepage, the landing page for Eco Education Qualified Eco EPD Officer. You will find the information there. What is the content, how about the dates, cost for it, the registration, or if the dates are not suitable, sign up for the newsletter for the next one. So I think that is a very good opportunity and very effective way of getting orientation while you're in your day-to-day business. So usually we see that manufacturers do not have the chance to really dig into the issues. They don't know where to search for and how to get efficiently the information they need. Here it is. We want, of course, to set a standard in education of this kind, and I think that's what's happening. So yeah, just can invite you to join.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I was just informed by my colleagues that we could not share it in the chat. The flyer will follow in the email together with the answers to all your questions.
I can share the link to the homepage. I think that's possible. And the flyer you can send afterwards.
Nice. Yeah, we will do. Yeah, so it's in the chat. And yeah, so thank you very much, Christian, for being with us today. Thank you all for your participation. I hope you learned a few things. I hope you got answers to some of your questions. The rest will follow by email. So thank you very much, and we would really love to hear your feedback. Thanks, Christian.
Sorry for not answering all the questions. I see there are so many interesting questions, but it's never enough time. So we should make sure that we answer the questions afterwards.
Yes, definitely. We will share them with you and make sure we tackle them all. Thank you all, and have a nice evening, a nice afternoon, evening. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Bye-bye. So you're still recording, right?
Give me a
Yeah.
second.
Yes.
I will
I think you
stop
stopped now.
recording.